Welcome, everybody. My name is Collin Marsden. I've been in the data engineering realm for about a decade. Started off very traditional data warehouse on SQL Server, lots of views and stored procedures, and wrapped up in SSIS packages. Quickly moved on to a cloud project where I got to build a data mesh platform, which is a lot of fun. And all of that was before I got to Liberty Energy, which is where I am now. Brought on at Liberty to build and standardize our data lake. And that's a piece of what I'm going to talk about today. Alon?
And my name is Alon. I also have been in data for the past decade, give or take. Previous to this company, I worked for a company that was building kind of like a vertical solution for data aggregation, reporting, more for the marketing tech kind of like universes. And then I started this company, Foundational, that is doing data governance and data lineage and a bunch of other things here, and have been fortunate to work with Collin and his team on a topic of data contracts, which is what we'll show you today. Hopefully also discussing the actual details and implementation specifics. So feel free to ask us time. We leave time for Q&A at the end, but we'll also pause throughout. Really feel free to ask us about the specifics. The purpose of this lecture is to not talk about our companies, but to talk about actually the topic of data contracts. That was very hot last year, and then I think gave room to the AI topics these days, but still very fundamental for data quality and trust and whatnot. So hope it's interesting.
Yep, feel free to interrupt at any time, y'all.
So I'll kick us off. We're here today to talk about not just data contracts, but how do you actually go around to design, implement, and make sure that you can use them at scale. So through a process and with ownership, and actually deploy them in an organization beyond, kind of like beyond the buzzwords. So this is what we'll show you, and we'll show you the project and also the running state of where we are right now between Foundational and Liberty, and also other things that we still haven't done and we're planning to do together. So let's do a quick refresh for folks that may not remember, or maybe this is also a place where we define formally this thing called the data contract. There's multiple definitions in a sense, so I could be going around the philosophy of what is a contract and whatnot, but I will kind of try to make it pragmatic. So a data contract ultimately is an agreement between a producer and a consumer, but not just in a single interface, at least the way we are seeing it. It can live between multiple systems, and normally in enterprise data stacks you have multiple technologies, multiple systems. So in our universe, the data contract, we wanted it to apply in multiple locations, and what we wanted to describe is how the data should look like, both in terms of the data itself, but also in terms of its characteristics. So schema, field types, ownership, and in theory, more concepts that can be baked in. And ultimately, we wanted to be in Git. That is kind of the, I think, consensus. So the data contract that needs to be in Git because it needs to have versions. Sometimes you may say, okay, let's put something new into the contract and agree together that we're adding something. And also it allows us to manage it in terms of version control. It allows us to automate things against that and all kinds of other interesting things that we'll show you. So this is what, when we say data contracts, we want to check all or maybe most of these things, and we want to have it in Git so that we can scale and move on from there.
Yeah, and just on that, data contract has to be a living document. It can't be something that you create once and forget about. So this is something at Liberty that we revisit regularly with our data owners and data stewards. So who is Liberty? Liberty Energy is an upstream oil field services company, one of the largest in North America. What sets us apart is really our commitment to being a premium service. We offer not just products, but data products as well. Everything from our on-site vans, where we have eliminated the dreaded spreadsheet and replaced it with streaming data applications, to our data warehouse and data lake. They've all been created so that we can get the customers the data that they want. And this customer-first approach is what drives us to continually innovate. So a little bit about our data architecture in my world. Our lakehouse or data lake is based off of AWS services. We've deployed a medallion architecture, and I want to kind of pause there for a second because it's, to me, a little comical of how different a medallion architecture can be from company to company. So when I say the bronze layer or the raw layer, what I mean is just that. The data in its raw format that has some additional metadata, right? Now our silver layer, on the other hand, that's where we have standardized our column names. We have unnested JSON. We have deduplicated, for instance. And then the gold layer, what sets that apart for us is that it's use case specific, right? So this is where the business logic really comes into play. What I think about when I think about the gold layer is if you have an application or a visualization that has 300 to 500 lines of Python code to get it to do what you want, that's going to be incredibly slow, right? So we're moving it from these visualization tools and applications back into the gold layer to resolve that issue. Now, where does foundational fit in? They are preventative and reactive data quality, data lineage, and data cataloging for us. So diving a little deeper into our technical systems, our data lake follows this bronze, silver, gold like I just talked about. We are on Iceberg in the silver and gold layers because we don't want to be vendor locked, right? Today we're on AWS, tomorrow maybe we'll be on Azure. So once the data has gone through our data lake, sometimes it will go to our data warehouse, which is ADW. What is unique about that is we don't replicate the data. We just expose the data to ADW, so we don't have duplicates all over the place, which is really nice. We also make data available through SDV. This is where users can join different data sets, create their own, and then ultimately publish it to Spotfire or Tableau. So what were our needs? Data lineage. I saw a huge problem at Liberty where people just didn't know where their data was going. We have tons of producers of data and tons of consumers of that data. So when someone was making a change to downstream, it broke something upstream. So we needed the ability to see where our data was going. And it also makes it really easy to troubleshoot, right? If I can just look at a graph and see all the hops that this data is making, then I can troubleshoot more quickly. Impact analysis is really what set Foundational apart for us. They are able to look at our repositories in Git, And when a merge request is created, it automatically scans that merge request and it can see where that data is going hop after hop after hop. So if I change a field name in the silver layer, I can tell which Tableau dashboards are going to break. Now, this is not a perfect world. In a perfect world, that would eliminate all the issues, right? But we also need reactive data quality where we can set rules and catch things after they happen. So that's where our data contracts really come in. We also have AI-enabled documentation. This helps when we don't have a source system with table and column definitions. Their AI can create that for us, and we can edit it from there to make it more accurate. What else? So on data contracts, I feel like when I started this, all of my data engineering friends on LinkedIn were talking about data contracts, and it was a really interesting concept to me, but the way they looked at it was create it once, stick it in Confluence, and let it die. And to me, if it's not living and it's not actionable, it's not worth anything. So that's why we started building our data contracts in YAML format with the hope that somewhere down the line we would be able to ingest them, make them consumable.
Okay, so this is not a session about foundational, but I'll give you some of the context around what we are. So as Collin mentioned, we're a data governance platform. Obviously, this entire conference is about data governance. The unique thing is that we also, or in particular, we analyze code in Git. In Liberty's case, GitLab. So we analyze, Collin mentioned the AWS Glue, and they have Spark, and they have PHP, and keep me honest, but they have a whole bunch of things that ultimately impact the data across the layers. And if we want to get to data contracts, which is the topic we'll show you right now, we first needed to establish this level of visibility, just understand all the data flows, understand what data sets are coming from where, and who is actually using them, whether it's on Spotify or Tableau or whatnot. So this is kind of like our secret sauce. Because we analyze the code, we also have workflows where, for example, we understand a code change, and now, okay, you're changing something here, and it's going to impact something in a completely different place. And basically, that allows us now to go into this topic of data contract and understand, okay, let's help manage now expectations around the data and schemas and whatnot, and also create some enforcement, right? Enforcement can be notifying someone when something looks off, or notifying someone when someone is trying to change something that we as data governance said, you know what, that is not in the contract, so that should be not merged, or that should be flagged or reported or whatnot. Right? So this is kind of like the entire background. And in terms of this data contract project, and this is also where we're trying to be, pragmatic to people that are sitting here and asking themselves, hey, okay, I want to implement data contracts. What should I do? We started by working with, obviously, Collin and the team to say, okay, what are some key data sets, ultimately tables, files, views, that are critical. Let's start with some contracts. We'll speak about the specifics and technicalities, but let's start with understanding what we want to enforce and where. Let's create a template. We'll show you how that template looks like. We kind of like proposed our own, then they took it and they changed it. But we landed on a template that describes quite a few things, right? That would be our standard. And then different people across Liberty can now take that specification and say, okay, for this data set, I want to enforce 1, 2, 3, and for other data sets, I want to enforce other things, and start to expand the concept, right? After we had that, we started both implementing the contracts themselves. We'll show you how that looks like, but essentially, as Collin said, YAML files that live in Git, and we can specify if there's one file that can now have 50 contracts or one file that has one contract. It's kind of like flexibility that sometimes it's helpful because you don't need to create as many files, but sometimes you also it can also be confusing. So I don't know, you can have multiple files that describe the same thing. So those things can also happen, and we'll describe how we approach them. It took us probably between a month to 2 months to kind of like do the back and forth against the early set of the contracts until, you know, we got to a happy place, I would say, and then move on from there. And then Collin will describe what they built on their end, which is a management system that works with those contracts, built entirely by Liberty. And we'll also describe, you know, where we are right now and some of the refinements that we recently did and whatnot. So this was the overall, let's call it project timeline. Give or take, I would say between a month and 2 months, and we're in a good place today, but there's, as always, more things to do. Okay, so let's start going into the specifics. Some of these could be quite high level and generic, but I'll show you some examples as well from the actual stuff that we have. So starting with critical data sets, we don't want to boil the ocean and all the cliches. Let's choose the data sets that maybe change more often, or maybe need, you know, more standardization around like what is allowed. Okay, here the schema. I mean, people generally know not to cause a breaking schema change, maybe sometimes, but they also change the definitions for the columns. So that's not a breaking schema change, but it impacts quite a bit. Or they add things, and again, that might not break someone on the Tableau side, but it changes the data. So that's where standardization is needed, because people are constantly moving things around, and the data doesn't look the same anymore. So choosing the critical set of data sets, and also understanding, you know, what we're okay with. Like, let's not run all the checks because it's also going to be very noisy. Let's understand, what do we want to check. Let's already build it into the contract, but maybe now we don't enforce it, right? Maybe it's in the contract, it's in the YAML file, but we don't actually flag if something is doesn't look right. So what you see here, hopefully you can see, is that basically these are files, contract name. These are files, and as you can see, that system, which is on our side, that shows violations. So a single file can describe 50 data sets because it lives in a folder in Git. It's ultimately a YAML. That's my next slide. So I'll show you how a file looks like. And it basically describes the data set. You know, this field needs to be Boolean. This field needs to be this. This field can have one of these 3 values. Collin is the owner of this contract. So if something fails, he should get a notification, and what is his email, or whatnot. Everything is kind of open-ended in that sense. There's no specification. I saw that there was a session from PayPal. PayPal, for example, has, I think, published their own data contract specifications. We're kind of gazing at that as well. So there's all kinds of things. I think the consensus is around YAML files in Git, version controlled, and building enforcements around them. And we build it in a way that all of these files, they're version control. You see who wants to push an update if you need to update the contract. And you see exactly who should get alerted or approve changes or whatnot. Let's look at some examples. So this is an area in the contract that has the ownership definitions. So data owner, data steward, support contact, consumers. And again, they put it into the contract. It's not necessarily that we're going to flag when someone, we're not going to do necessarily anything with all of these fields, but they're there, A, for future use, and B, because now someone looking into the contract, they can understand what's going on, right? So it's another source of information to organize things or to govern things, if you will. Another area is schema rules. That's actually a part where we enforce, right? So schema rules, we created, I mean the Liberty Energy team created that initial set of contracts, going one by one and saying, okay, this is how it should look like at the feed level, because now if someone accidentally changes something or deliberately changes something, that would be my job to basically raise a flag and say, hey, this is not allowed, you're violating a contract, right? That part at the time was manual in the sense of creating the contract. I would even also say by design, we really wanted to go over and understand what's happening, but today there are ways to automate some of these things. Data quality rules. So here, again, going back to the Liberty team, describe how your data should look like. Now, there's a trade-off here. If now you're describing, you know, oh, what are the possible ranges, you need to be careful, which we'll talk about. It can be very noisy. So there's kind of little point in now defining something that is going to get violated every day or a few times per week. So there's a trade-off to what needs to be standardized in a contract versus data quality checks, which you can do more and do something with them. But the concept of noise fatigue is you know, very relevant here. And this is kind of like the last part about the strategy. So we had some back and forth both around the template and also about the specifics where we should report. If a contract can get violated when the data doesn't look right, but also, I wouldn't call it a violation, but also there are contract changes or contract updates. So we need to handle both of these use cases separately, right? And understand, especially these guys, understand what they're going to do with that information. And lastly, as a rule of thumb, we wanted all of this, after all of this, we wanted something that is manageable. So if they're getting dozens of alerts every week, then it's not going to work as a scalable thing, right? So even if we don't have enforcement against everything, at least we have something that gives them, I want to say, something that they can use. And lastly, I mentioned, like, there can be more data quality rules than contracts. So I would, at least by my, and I think Collin agrees, like, really put in contracts like the critical things and not every data quality rule that you have, because the line get vague, like the border gets vague between, okay, we can put all of our data checks into the contract, but then it's kind of like it skews the terminology.
Yeah, if we get 10 alerts a day because we've defined rules that are too strict, our data engineers, our data stewards, our data owners are just going to ignore it, right? So we need to make sure that our alerts are actually meaningful.
Yeah, there's kind of a philosophical point where if someone violates the contract, it needs to be a violation, not just a skew of the data, in a sense. So something more than, okay, the job failed, and like a job failed is not contract violation. But the line is murky in some of these areas.
So we think the same, I mean, even with observability tools, right? Most of this schema, skewing, so there are observability tools that basically look for those.
Correct.
And then provide it, look at the schema drifts and stuff, what you're saying, and then alert. So people are like engineers getting alerts from there. Again, the same alerts are coming in the data contracts.
So that is where, I guess, to paraphrase your comment as the question, you're asking about the very same topic, which is, okay, how do you distinguish between data contract originated alerts versus data quality and data observability kind of like alerts? Right, right, observability. Yeah, yeah. So there are some areas that I would say are clearly on the contract side, and some areas that, to your point, are kind of like in between. Flagging a schema change when you're looking at an earlier stage where before it shows up in the data, that's more on the contract side. That's the infamous, you know, breaking schema change that someone might do. So in a sense, the breaking schema change, which doesn't always have to be a breaking schema change. It can be someone changing you know, a field before it had 3 possible values. Now someone wants to add a 4th value, right? it's not going to be a breaking schema change, but that's a contract or an implicit contract because you're basically creating a new model for the downstream business users.
That's just a washing change again.
Sorry?
That's a washing change.
A washing change?
Washing change, the next version, right?
Oh, version change. Sorry. Yeah.
Then how do you communicate all those to the consumers? And do you guys follow the process to manage these changes so that it won't break?
So I'll answer for my end, and then you can talk about for my end as the technical side. Whatever these guys are putting in the contract, I'm responsible for flagging, for understanding what they want me to check, and then the routing is actually defined in the contract. So if in the contract it says, hey, flag to Collin or Shannon or to this team's channel, flag it there. If I can flag it in the pull request, I'll flag it in the pull request. But in a sense, I'm kind of a robot in that sense, and people can define in the contracts whatever they want as long as we can enforce it, right? But
yeah, no, that's exactly right. We define in the contract who's going to get alerted. Our standard is first we alert the data engineering team. Once we make sure that we don't have a bunch of noise in those alerts, then we'll add in our data owner, our data steward, and anybody else that needs to be on there. And that helps to keep the team accountable, right? If a data owner says, hey, I'm getting an alert every 2 weeks, what's going on with my data, then my team needs to jump on that. But on the observability piece, that's something that's really important to us. So take, for instance, you have a data contract where one of the fields you say completeness needs to be 90%, right? Now, if I'm getting 1 million records a day and I'm checking the entire timeline of data and I get one run of 1 million rows where everything is null, right? I might not hit that 90% because I'm getting 1 million rows every single day. So what we did is to set schedules for specific tables and databases. So this runs every day at 5 a.m. and checks the last 24 hours of data. So therefore, if I get 1 million null rows, I'm going to get an alert.
So you basically invoke the data quality rules separately and then put it into the contract that's violating the percentage, or are you both combining the contract itself?
Combining. I want everything in one place.
Yeah. Basically, the contract has, at least from our point of view, the contract has the critical set of also data quality rules. And there are also things that live outside of the contract. And from a philosophical perspective, again, that's exactly the gray area. But if you're changing an assumption, you should update the contract, right? Like if something fundamental about the data changes, go and change the contract. Like you cannot just change or treat it as an alert, if that makes sense. Yeah. The UI development is their work. Basically, what the next phase of that project was, okay, we had those contracts in place. The first critical set. Our UI was kind of lacking at the time or was not as good. And also, joking aside, we basically there's more strength in companies running their own UI internally and exposing it to more people on the Liberty side. So Collin and the Liberty team basically built their own UI that Liberty Energy has that works against Git because Git is essentially the source of truth for both companies.
Thank you. So before I talk about the UI development, I have to give you guys a little insight into how our development process works. So typically we'll create a story in Jira, we'll have requirements that'll get pushed out to a developer. Developer will do local development. Let's just assume this is an API data source, right? So they're going to be on their laptop, hitting this API, retrieving the data, doing their exploratory data analysis and data profiling. And once they've done that, what I want my team to do is take that information back to the stakeholder, be that the data steward, the data owner, project owner, whatever, and validate, hey, is this data what you're expecting? And what they can do from that data profiling report that they create is build out the bronze and what they assume will be the silver layer and create the beginnings of a data contract. So finally, in that meeting, my hope is that they build the data contract with the person responsible to define that gold layer. One clarifying point is kind of the way we tag data at the bronze and silver layer is by data source. Whereas at the gold layer, that doesn't make sense because you could have multiple data sources that you're joining together and aggregating and doing whatever you want with, right? So at the gold layer, we're tagging the data based on the domain. So IT software development or LPI, whatever the case may be. And so from there, obviously, dev development, pushing to GitLab, peer reviewing, and merging to dev. And so what we found in this process is not everyone likes looking at a YAML file, especially people who are not technically savvy, right? So that's kind of what drove us to build this UI. So this is kind of the landing page, and if you look in the top right, you can see you can either create a new contract or upload a YAML file. So it's pretty simple for my team to have a repeatable Python script that spits out the schema into this YAML format that we can then, and it can tell us, are there any nulls in this data? Are there any distinct values, so on and so forth, right? So we're kind of checking boxes by outputting this schema in this format. And so then we can upload that into this UI and review it with our stakeholders. Yeah, and basically what we're trying to do here is build faith in our data, build faith in our data contracts. So we want something nice and pretty to show our stakeholders, right? We go through, I won't take you through every field, but foundational requires a contract name, a version. If a specific contract is too noisy, we might want to deactivate it. So we have that option here. One thing that you didn't see in Alon's screenshots is this concept of monitors, right? So in our schema validation, we set freshness and we set a threshold for it, right? So I expect this data to refresh every 24 hours. If it does not, I want to get an alert. Well, what if the data set's getting overwritten every night? Then it's going to say there's new data here, but there's no actual new data, right? So we can create a custom monitor through this UI, which is basically just a SQL script that says, hey, do I actually have a new row count from the day prior, right? So this has been really helpful for us. You can use it for you can use it for anything, right? As long as your SQL query outputs a metric, then Foundational can alert on it, right? So parent-child relationships, things like that. Any questions on the UI? Cool.
Question.
Oh.
Automated the backend once they enter the information to the UI are the monitors created on the backend?
Great question. Thank you. So the UI will store our data contract in GitLab. then Foundational will see that change, automatically pick up that data contract and create, yes, not just the custom monitors, but all of the data quality rules that we have set. And so that's what I mean by actionable, right? Like this is sitting in a Git repo, we can change it at any time, and that's automatically going to be picked up by Foundational and have those rules created.
So how often those rules creates and then those monitors?
How often do they run?
Yeah.
Whatever we set
Yeah,
it to.
it's defined in the contract. So you can define if, I mean, I guess there is probably a point, a limitation somewhere, but if they specify run every 5 minutes, we're gonna run it every 5 minutes. Yeah.
And then you're gonna, so when it breaks,
Yep.
is it happening from, like the communication is coming from this contract or your tool is going to basically?
From our tool based on what they defined in the contract.
So
Yeah.
basically that's your policy or whatever.
Exactly.
Yeah. It's a policy as code. Yeah, contracts essentially, that goes maybe back to the philosophy, but it's policies as code, which the benefits are kind of like everything, version control and whatnot. Yeah. By the way, as a nuance, you can also have multiple contracts against the same table, because you created your own contract and I created my own contract and you created another contract. Each one checks slightly different things because maybe I'm more sensitive as a consumer. That's legitimate, right? Because we can be 3 different consumers and not have the exact same requirements on the data, right?
I think where we're getting a lot of overlapping between the tools. And like, if you're using data quality, let's say Informatica, if you're using observability as, let's say, Monte Carlo or some other, and you're using ETL as a DBT for all your translation, every tool has some flavor of those DQ checks, contract, alerting systems and stuff. And that's where the confusion to everybody, where do we put things?
Right.
And then at the same time, you don't want to overwhelm the people to get all the notifications, duplicate notification coming from Informatica, all the tools, and then nobody's going to look at it.
Yep.
So that's the art.
Yeah, that was super important for us. We wanted one place where everything is defined. So, yep. Did you have a question?
You answered it. I was just wondering, you said that contract templates, if they vary based on source.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. Oh, yeah. This is me. So what do data contracts do for us? They increase transparency. The devs are working with the stakeholders so that the stakeholders understand exactly what's happening. Accountability for my team, for data stewards, for data owners, and ultimately trust. Like that's what this entire project was about, is we want to build trust in our data. We don't want people coming to us saying, hey, this hasn't been refreshed in 3 days, what's going on, right? Yeah, alerting based on agreed upon rules with data stewards, flexibility to create custom roles based on custom rules based on business logic, and automated ingestion of the data contracts like we talked about.
Do you guys have monitoring on your data contracts?
What do you mean?
How do you measure how many things grow?
Oh, okay. So yeah, that's exactly the red column. So there are remaining things that we need to do. We've done some of them or whatnot. I would say the big topic that right now is okay, but we still need to improve, is how you manage contract creation and communicate. So a person can create a new contract. That contract doesn't follow the template, or it creates a collision with another contract that is somewhere there. All kinds of these day-to-day use cases. We've handled, I would say, probably the 80% of those things, but still sometimes you see that, oh, okay, someone creates a contract here, I'll give you another one. when you create a contract, you don't necessarily know how noisy it is, right? It's going to be, right? So I can create a contract that I think is great, but then it's now bombarding alerts. So that's something that today I don't do, or at least I think that I don't do. But you can basically run a sort of a simulation, whether you do it with AI or actual data, and see, okay, did that contract, an estimated number of alerts as it's defined right now, it's going to be 50 per week. So maybe I don't want that, right? So that entire feedback layer, we have some things there that would block someone from randomly adding a bad contract, but there's more back and forth around that process of, you can have today, I think we have a few hundreds, but maybe you want to get to the thousands, or again, multiple consumers, all kinds of these cases. So that's one area, and on the kind of like on the next steps front, where we really want to help is the automation. In a lot of cases, there's contracts that you can already gather from the data itself, right? So not necessarily require people to manually go field by field in the YAML or in the nice UI and define. And you kind of want to automate at least a bulk of the contract creation. And again, the kind of like the UI setting can be a suggested contract or a draft pull request. All those capabilities exist today, but we want to basically make it a bit more production ready, so that the contract creation also doesn't necessarily fall on the data engineers, data stewards, and data governance people, right? More types of checks and guide rails. So as I've shown in the original template, there's a lot of things right now in the YAML. We don't necessarily do everything with every field. So some of these things are things that we want to understand more. And I guess I'm always putting UI enhancements. So, make things, at least in my UI, which I've shown in the beginning, like make it a bit more easy to navigate and debug and that simulation thing I mentioned and a bunch of other things. Yes, a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, is this across platforms that you guys are doing, or is it specific to, like, let's say Snowflake or?
No, so it's cross for sure. I would say that there are some environments, I need to do the enforcement. So there are some environments where it's harder or where we didn't go as far. So today, keep me honest, Collin, but for example, databases and warehouse, quote unquote, easy, right? Because the schema, you can run a check against the data. That's pretty easy. When you go to files, Iceberg is pretty good in that sense because you have good knowledge about the schema. But if there is some random unstructured data in S3, we might be able to do something, but then you actually need to parse not just the metadata of the file, but parse the actual file. So this we don't do today. In theory, you can do that. You can now create assumptions. At least the concept allows for that. But frankly, I don't have that in our platform today, like a file that is very arbitrary, I would say. So we kind of start at the iceberg stage, right? And then move forward, or did I miss some areas where we have contracts?
No, that's accurate.
Yeah, so kind of like iceberg and forward and down.
But we have AWS, we have Oracle, we have Snowflake,
Yeah.
so it's across our entire data stack.
So you could write a contract, let's say data source from AWS, now we'll get into Snowflake.
Mhm.
Right?
Exactly.
In a sense, a lot of these files that land are files that coming in from third parties, right? So that you don't have, the code is not even yours. So in a sense, maybe that also goes to the philosophy. But the contract kind of starts where you're getting data and you need to verify that the data, you got, something that we get all the time, different types of industries, you get CSVs from a partner. And they send you every once in a while a different column structure in the CSV. That goes to this topic where essentially they violated the agreement, quote unquote, that they had with you, where you always getting a file with 8 columns and now you got 9, right? So that is where kind of like I think that becomes pragmatic, and you, technically speaking, you want to validate that all the files that you get follow the same schema, right? or the same order of the schema, or etc. etc.
The data contracts in every layer, or is just the curator the one that
I think
For us, we go silver and gold. Yeah.
Yeah.
Who is your customer? Your customer first approach. Who is your customer? Is it internal or is it external?
Both. We have internal, but ultimately we're serving the customer. So that'll be, Exxon or someone like that, right?
Yes.
So, today we don't do the contract, right? But for example, let's say we onboard and then after a few months and then they wanted to change the rules. What is the best practice to deactivate the contract and then create new ones to not get confusion? Or you update
Version.
Question.
Just version it. Yep.
and make sure like if they want to see something why they changed last year, I can really track to
Yeah.
Exactly.
And
That's
by the
why-
way, it's also a pull request now. So it's audited. I mean, it's logged. You can assign a reviewer. So it goes through the best practices.
Can
Right.
you make two data contracts active? Like,
Against the same thing?
Yeah.
let's
Yeah.
say you're adding a new column.
Yeah.
That's a new contract, but there are custom consumers who are using still old. So how do you make both of them active? And then like say, hey, whenever you're ready, you're not breaking their system,
Mhm.
but they can consume so
Okay. So keeping different people on different contracts, I think today we don't have that, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
it's
Hey-
a Java program, right? Like you duplicate something, but your program doesn't break it until you move to the next one.
1 second. Before everyone takes off, how many people have data contracts implemented today?
One.
Okay. Thank you.
like bring our data contracts out, roll them out more broadly.
Yeah.
We've been having a lot of trouble getting adoption of like getting people to fill out the contracts, especially on our data engineering side, just they're just doing used to handling it differently with the requirements gathering process.
Right.
Have you handled any of those issues in your journey and how did you navigate those?
Not so much with the data engineers. I have trouble all the time with data stewards and data owners, oddly enough, even though that's the people it benefits. But on the data engineering side, I think we just did a great job of explaining the benefits and the rollout process. I made it as easy as possible for them. I gave them Python scripts to populate for what already exists. Like there's ways you can, lessen the burden on your
Yeah.
data engineering team.
Minimize the friction. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, y'all.